Morning. Our anchor is right under your rudder. You'll go forward for a minute? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so bringing it up slow. Idle! Thank you!
Alright, we're
free to go!
Our bareboat charter in the Grenadines included many such challenges. Our aggressive 8-night, more than 200 nautical mile itinerary probably didn't help.
What time is it?
9:25.
Yeah!
The first morning of a bareboat charter is always a flurry of activities. There's the boat briefing, the chart briefing, and provisioning. Provisioning took the longest time as there were a lot of groceries to get and it was a multi-leg journey from the supermarket to the galley. A few key items were missing from our boat and some last-minute repairs were required. Well, I guess you can call them repairs. Most of the crew needed to borrow snorkeling gear from our charter company.
They keep the snorkeling gear with the toxic chemicals?
Yep.
Andrew!
What?
What are you doing? What are you doing over there?
Cooling off.
This first day, we had a short motor sail south down the west coast of St. Lucia, from Rodney Bay to Pitons Bay. There, 2 bags of delayed luggage successfully caught up with our group, thanks to the swanky Sugar Beach Resort. We ventured ashore and found the back room and sad little TV where Sugar Beach was showing the Super Bowl for its American guests. And us.
Takes it 13 yards. Look, he's a heavy-footed runner. What do I mean by that? It's just that he has good...
The next morning we wanted to sail south more than 50 nautical miles, passing to the west of St. Vincent and then arriving in Admiralty Bay in Bequia. 5 of the 8 mornings on this trip we had to get started as soon as possible for one reason or another. This morning was the earliest of them all because we messed up the time zones when we set our alarms the night before. We were underway before anyone was awake enough to even think about coffee. Fortunately, the groggy crew didn't forget anything vital or drop anything overboard.
You ready? Alright, you're free.
The upside of starting with such a long day is that we figured out the boat's quirks in one go. The non-adjustable lazy jacks were the first obvious nuisance. It became obvious pretty quickly that our moorings 43.3 had an underpowered rudder. It was impossible to sail the boat hard enough to put the rail in the water. The boat would either round up, or the rudder would stall and halt your forward progress before it would submerge the rail. With an underpowered rudder, it was essential that we carry the correct amount of sail. I thought that would be pretty easy in the tradewinds, but I was wrong. To the west of the mountainous islands, you'd often find yourself becalmed in a wind shadow. To the north and south of the islands, the tradewinds rushed around the mountains, creating compression zones that reinforced the trades, making for some great sailing. On this day's passage, we would go from motor sailing through calms to fully reefed 3 times. On the other hand, we didn't tack or jive during the entire trip, so at least raising and shortening sail kept us from getting bored. We also noticed that the jib sheets were tied on with a half a twist, so they really tended to get fouled if they flogged at all.
That's it.
Reefing was further complicated by the single-line reefing system, which seemed purpose-built for tangling lines. This 52 nautical mile passage took us just under 8 hours, but even with the learning curve, we managed to average 6.7 knots, which would be our fastest passage the entire charter. Tuesday, we sailed 25 nautical miles to anchor inside of Horseshoe Reef at Tobago Cays. The crew settled into their passage routines. After navigating the windy entrance, we dropped the hook with no land to our east until Africa. Tobago Cays snorkeling was current, chop, stingray, and sea turtle filled. There was a specter hanging over our time at Tobago Cays. One of our crew, heretofore referred to as Gimpy, set one foot off the dinghy and deeply cut the bottom of her foot. Before we could get everyone ashore, we were rounding them up again to figure out treatment options. We determined that the nearest medical facility was within 15 nautical miles. Unfortunately, by that point, it was late enough in the day that we would wind up pulling into an unfamiliar reef-strewn anchorage around sunset. After some calls to some medical professionals back in the States, and since we couldn't determine if the clinic would be open when we got there, we decided that first thing in the morning was our best option. It was really eerie that we were so close to medical assistance, yet it was still out of reach. Tobago Cays was an absolutely beautiful anchorage. The crew of Django had a very pleasant picnic barbecue ashore. Unfortunately, the anchorage was also pretty rough. There was at least a knot of current where we were anchored and no protection from the trade winds. We let out extra scope to ensure our anchor would hold as we slept through another rolling night. Wednesday morning, we were on our way from Tobago Cays to Union Island as soon as we extricated our anchor from underneath our neighbor's boat. It was a short motor sail, and 2 hours after we got underway, Gimpy was on her way to the hospital ashore. They cleaned her cuts out more thoroughly than we did. She didn't get any stitches. The dressing was to be changed every day and every time it got wet. Since we were in Union Island, we signed up for kiteboarding lessons, though that's a bit of a misnomer. The 3-hour lesson didn't include the board, just the kite. That evening, we made our way over to Happy Island for a sundowner or 5. As we were leaving, we noticed the dinghy was alarmingly deflated. My headlamp also decided this would be the opportune moment to stop working. It was very nerve-wracking taking 6 people a half a mile in a dark anchorage on a deflating dinghy. The next morning we discovered we need to go back to Beckway to repair our dinghy. The chandlery on Union Island was out of Hypalon glue. This was just as well because the swell was creeping into the harbor and making our spot on the pier untenable. We left Union Island and sailed close-hauled back to Admiralty Bay in Beckway. Sailing with the partially deflated dinghy on deck made sailing a bit more difficult, but we managed. The dinghy repair was just like any other two-part adhesive application. Clean the surfaces, rough up the surfaces, mix the glue, apply the glue, and press together. Then allow to dry. The process was made a bit more complicated by the rain squalls repeatedly rolling in. Once the dinghy was repaired, the rain ceased entirely and we were able to head ashore and salvage what was left of the day. We got a pretty good sunset. The crew of Django was nice enough to ferry everyone ashore so the whole group could enjoy a steel drum band to wrap up the night. The next morning, we needed to check out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We knew we only had a short sail off the wind to the next anchorage, so we lingered ashore and enjoyed breakfast. We left the dinghy on deck to make sure the patch's adhesive had plenty of time to dry. Uncharacteristically, everyone was up to enjoy the sail from Beckway to Grenadines Bay in St. Vincent.
Good for the camera.
To port a little bit. Slow it down. Slow it down. Back up, back up, back up.
Tying up was a bow and stern mooring, but without a leader line between them. So after you caught the mooring on the bow, a tender took a line from your stern to the stern mooring, and you pulled it in to keep yourself aligned with the other boats. The anchorage was very protected from the wind, but unfortunately not the swell. Personally, this quickly became my favorite stop of the trip. Bella Dulce 2 and Django were a stone's throw apart, and shortly after we tied up, most of the crew were in the water swimming. For most of the day, we had the cove to ourselves, and I enjoyed exploring our black sand aquatic home.
Bye guys! Got a little exposure, right?
After most had their fill of swimming, it was time for captain's hour, and the sundowners began flowing. Even Gimpy, who didn't want to change her foot's dressing, made her way over to Django for an aptly named painkiller. It was good preparation for our lovely dinner ashore that evening. On Saturday, we needed to make more than 40 nautical miles north, hard on the wind, to get from Grenadines Bay in St. Vincent to Marigot Bay in St. Lucia. Fortunately, this late in the trip we had sailing Bella Dolce 2 down pat. Most of the crew napped as the skipper and I sailed northward, close-hauled, with some avian entertainment. Even though this was our windiest day, it wasn't our fastest passage, but it did go very smoothly. We chose Marigot Bay because it was the closest place to the moorings base where we could clear into St. Lucia without returning to the base itself. Marigot Bay turned out to be the best mooring accommodations ever. It came with great showers, trash service, but more importantly, access to an amazing resort and its amenities for only $30 US. This was easily the best mooring I've ever had. During the best vacations, you forget about real life. Throughout this week, I would have sworn that my life consisted of exploring paradise by sailboat with my friends, working as a team to overcome whatever challenges paradise doled out. Each Team Yacht Sauce trip evokes those same emotions, and I'm very grateful to every member of the team for making another trip wonderful. I'm already looking forward to the next one.
Cheers!
To the skippers!
Cheers!
Yes! To victory!
Cheers!
1, 2, 3, splash! Jesus Christ!
It's not tied, but it's...
Save him, Gerhan!
Let him give you kisses now.
We'll find out.
I don't know.
Hysterical.